Today's businesses are on a vigilant watch for threats in an ongoing cyber war. It's time to get real-world solutions to protect and secure your valuable business information anytime, anywhere. Welcome to Cybersecurity America with Josh Nicholson. You're about to gain special access into a world of restricted information and a backstage pass to the inner sanctum of cybersecurity operations. Here's your host, Joshua Nicholson.
Now, don't forget to hit like, subscribe, comment, share, and turn on those notifications so you don't miss an exciting episode. So I was looking for show ideas. I really wanted to focus on cybersecurity within government, not just federal government, but look at state and local municipalities and how they're struggling under the weight of these cyber attacks and what is considered critical for government to function. Where do we see trends that directly impact our daily lives, from utilities management, tax collection, public safety, roads and infrastructure management? All these functions are converging using technology, and the disruption of that by cyber criminals have had an impact on our supply chains and just key services for day-to-day life. Now, in order to fully understand what government needs are in the realm of technology risk management, I need to get the perspective of someone who's worked in city and state government from some of the highest levels. To get that real perspective on the issue, I turn to someone who has years of experience running government as a mayor and as a governor within the state of North Carolina. I thought, who best to help navigate this complicated topic and try to understand what are the cybersecurity implications and what we can do to help manage those threats in society. Patrick Lloyd McCrory is an American politician. He's a businessman and a radio host who served as the 74th governor of North Carolina from 2013 to 2017. Now, as a member of the Republican Party, he previously served as the 53rd mayor of Charlotte from 1995 to 2009. While serving as mayor of Charlotte, McCrory served on the U.S. Homeland Security Advisory Council from 2002 to 2006 under President George W. Bush. He was a Republican nominee for the governor of North Carolina in the 2008 general election. Now, Mr. McCrory was again the Republican nominee in 2012 gubernatorial race. He won 55% of the vote. He became the first mayor of Charlotte to win the state's highest office, as well as the first Republican to win the governorship of North Carolina since 1988. Some of the other things of Mr. McCrory's background: he's also hosted the Pat McCrory Show with Bo Thompson on WBT, 11:10 a.m. in Charlotte, North Carolina. And in 2002, he had the President George W. Bush appointed him to the U.S. Homeland Security Advisory Council, along with Mitt Romney, Sonny Perdue, and Lee Hamilton. Now, welcome to the show, Governor. So glad to have you. Did I miss anything from your background, sir?
Currently, just to let you know, I'm co-chairman of a group called No Labels nationally, along with Joe Lieberman and Ben Chavis, Dr. Ben Chavis, and also the former governor of Maryland, Larry Hogan. So that's where I'm spending my volunteer time an awful lot. And I'm doing a lot. I've been doing a lot of Meet the Press, NBC analysts too, and serve on a board or two.
So you're still staying pretty busy, I see.
I'm trying to. I think it's very important, no matter what. It's time to use our wisdom now, the lessons learned, especially in your area of expertise, to try to prevent some of the mistakes we've made in the past. And I think that's one of my major goals now, is to teach young leaders what to look out for.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have so many questions for you right now. Some of the things I wanted to start with, I see just an annual number of cyber events, according to the U.S. federal agencies, from 2006 to 2022. Just in that fiscal year of 2022, the number of cybersecurity events reported to federal agencies was over 30,000, around a 5% decrease from the previous year. When we look at a lot of stuff that's targeting federal government or even small sectors and so forth, it seems like there's a lot of impersonation. There's a lot of stuff that's happening and disrupting of small and local business. But what's been your experience so far on what are some of the things that we need to be aware of when it comes to cybersecurity and government right now?
First of all, from a personal standpoint, we all have to be concerned. When I was governor of North Carolina, I was attacked personally, where someone actually did my income taxes from Florida, and it was Russia influenced. And it took 2 years to track it down. I had to work through the FBI, and ever since I've had to have a special tax code. But I literally, while I was governor, had someone else do my taxes. I didn't know it until I did my taxes. I got a note from the IRS saying you've already got a refund.
Oh,
And
wow.
I found out it was a elderly couple in Miami who did my taxes, and it was coordinated by the Russians. That woke me up. But I'd long known the cybersecurity issue. I really got into it. First of all, I was mayor in 1995, and I was the first mayor in Charlotte history to have a computer on their desk and have an email. That's how
Oh,
new
really?
this is. I had to have my 10-year-old teach me how to use it.
First to have an email.
And this was when we were phoning in, trying to do some phone type connections with emails. But later on, after 2001, when I got on Homeland Security, I was appointed as chairman of the subcommittee to oversee private sector communications. Mm-hmm. And so much of that was cybersecurity, because when there is either a man-made attack or a natural disaster, it's the private sector that you have to depend upon and their technology to get the water systems back, to get the electricity lines back, and now, of course, to get the cell towers back. And you don't realize how new that is, actually, at least in my lifetime, is that cell towers is probably the most important thing you have to get back in a time of natural disaster or man-made disaster. But during my experience on Homeland Security, that we also learned how vulnerable we are. How our infrastructure system, how our IT systems are extremely vulnerable, and they're not protected regarding if something does happen. We didn't have a lot of choices to get around it. It literally shut down the whole system. And we see this with infrastructure too, with gas lines and electric lines. If the main lines in New York City are cut off, all of New York City is gone. There's no alternative routes. It's like the major highway going into a city, having an accident, and there's no detour to go on. Right. That's it. That's the only bridge in town. Underneath that bridge are a lot of IT infrastructures, which are extremely vulnerable to the terrorist or to war and things of that nature. In fact, if you look at the crisis in the Mideast right now going on, or even the war in Russia, Ukraine, the question might be what happens when they start going after the satellites.
Yeah.
Once they're down, military connectivity and other types of connectivity are gone. So that has not happened yet to our knowledge. But that could be something that future leaders are going to have to think about. And sadly, that's called space warfare, which now there's a separate department that I think President Trump created. So it gets from the most minor issues of an individual elected official of the 9th largest state having his information stolen and used and coordinated by the Russians, all the way to warfare. And that's the way we have to think about it and the ramifications of it.
No, absolutely. And I think just the topic of it really came on really sudden and quick. It wasn't like government really could adapt to it. It was all of a sudden where the use of technology went from modems and pagers to all of a sudden smartphones. And the technology and our controls and just thinking how it can be used and secured has just gone really quick.
In fact, absolutely. And the dilemma is you have politicians like me or every member of the Senate or House or other governors, mainly the governors and mayors, whose most of them aptitude is pretty low in this area. So they're dependent upon staff. Then you have to figure out, do you have the staff in government that compares equally to the talent that you have in the private sector? And the answer is probably no, because you're not paying the wages that the private sector is paying IT people. And the other issue might be you even have transition issues, change in administrations in the White House or a governor's office. When all these new people come, one thing that's happened at the White House and has happened in many state governments is all the laptops that people had, the 28-year-olds, the 25-year-olds that had jobs, they just walk out with their IDs and their passcodes, and the oversight is extremely limited. And believe me, the people who want to get into the system know how lax some of the government systems are, especially with temporary workers based on 2 or 4 year terms.
No, yeah, it makes sense. I also envision that when I look at the GAO reports and I look at the Verizon breach reports, a lot of it is help desk manipulation. It's still impersonation of highly credentialed individuals like IT managers that can reset passwords and get in the systems and so forth. And I just thought that maybe that's how government works. It's Sally in accounting, or it's this over. If you knew the right people, I'm sure as mayor or governor, you knew who to pick up the phone and who to talk to.
In fact, when I was governor, I saw IT and the systems extremely disjointed. Every department had their own IT.
Oh, really?
And there was no tie-in whatsoever. So one of my first acts as governor is I made my IT person centralized, reporting directly to me and a member of my cabinet. Now, this upset some of the Department of Transportation or the Health and Human Services or even the personnel department go, no, we like our own system. I want an IT person to report to me because then I have more control over it. But the dilemma is, with those central control in a major state government like North Carolina, which again is the 9th largest state in the United States, right. The opportunity to get into our system as we decentralized during all these years since the 80s when all this started being developed, was very open to potential long-term problems and short-term problems. So that's the first thing I did was make an IT person as a member of my cabinet and came to every one of my cabinet meetings every Tuesday morning. And it was tough because the Department of Transportation, you go, what's the big deal with the Department of Transportation? There's a big deal because one of the things that some of the foreign companies or foreign governments are doing, they're trying to get into the state DOTs, into their system. You may ask, why would China or Russia or whoever want to get into a DOT site? Well, China owns a lot of construction companies, and a lot of construction companies put in bids for $100 million, $1 billion road projects.
Right.
And they're bid on. Wouldn't it be nice to know what those bids were?
Competitive intelligence.
These are the stuffs I had to learn as governor and going, wait a minute, I have to protect DOT as much as I have to protect the Department of Health and Human Services, which is a lot of personnel information on people across the state on their health, which is extremely important data to a lot of people who want to steal that data for the sake of their own business. And you also have a lot of vendors and lobbyists and who are trying to get into the government data for their clients and go, hey, if we get into that data that the government owns, we could use that for the private sector. And I'm not even getting to election data, which has been controversial. So this is where an IT person on my cabinet was extremely important to me. In fact, I remember in my about 4th month in office, he came in and said, Governor, we got to do something you might not want. And I said, what's that? He said, we're going to do a test on our entire system to see how many people are infiltrating our system because it hasn't been done for 4 years. And you're not going to like the results. Or we can do nothing and just pretend it's not happening. I remember sitting in the governor's office going, we have no choice but to do it. Right. But it's going to be embarrassing politically if it comes out that all that information during my watch, because whoever's in office will be blamed for the breaches that have maybe been occurring for years in my state. They become political decisions.
And that's what gets so difficult. Political decisions, when you think just from a cybersecurity perspective, it's just a technology decision. It's just to deploy technology in this way and manage it in this manner. And seeing that centralized approach rather than to hear the different departments segmented like that, you understand why a technologist or a cybersecurity person has to help meld that together and have a consolidated approach towards it. But I guess that leads into one of my other questions. I see where GAO says they had over 4,000 recommendations to different agencies on cybersecurity shortfallings, and there's only 880 of them have not been fully implemented. So it's over and over again. I see where there's recommendations for changes and vulnerabilities within state and local governments, but sometimes it seems difficult that they're making any improvement in it. Is it because of the disjointed nature that you just talked about and all the dimensions to the problem, or is it bigger than that?
It's many reasons. One is command and control. decentralized. Some of it, by the way, you're buying. I found we were buying software, for example, that had not been used in 5 to 10 years, but the vendor kept saying, "Hey, re-sign this," and someone would sign it. And the vendor has a good relationship. I'm not saying it was corrupt. I'm just saying the vendor probably knew they weren't using it anymore. The person signing it probably went, "Oh, just another sheet of paper. We'll sign off on that $1 million contract." And I stopped a lot of those during my first year as governor. But I'll tell you, another dilemma is turnover in state government and IT, because as the way people in IT get promoted is to move to another company or to another organization. That's the best way to make more money. And as the limited number of IT people that were available in the private sector, they were stealing from the public sector.
Yeah.
So you might have had a person on my team way down working on a recommendation, and like you maybe have now, that person suddenly leaves. And it can be put off on the side until they hire someone new and has to be retrained. The next thing, you could have a year gap right there between the recruitment and hiring and training when that person left with a 2-week notice.
And does it make sense? Government's job is to run government, banks to run banks. Does it make sense to do managed services and have your security run by other security companies and say, okay, I'm never going to hire this talent within government. Do I have a bucket of hours in which I can consult that kind of talent to do that kind of stuff? Do you see that as maybe a method moving forward? Or?
I did some contracting out. The only danger is you've got to manage, you've got to have the qualified people to manage the contract itself.
Right.
You've got to make sure, is it a good contract? Is it a fair contract? Is it a contract in which your information is confidential? To make sure that contractor doesn't release any of that information with other potential conflicts of interest. Mm-hmm. You've got to make sure, how do you measure whether that contract's doing a good job or not? I know we had vendors constantly selling us even issues of security, but you've got to make sure then you have a person who at the end of that contract or midway points, 6 months or a year, are they really getting results? Nice. And you even have people who are qualified to measure whether they're getting results. It's a very difficult situation, especially when you have high turnover or you have people who aren't really qualified in the contract area. They might be qualified in IT, but they're not qualified in reviewing contracts. Those are tough skills to find.
They definitely are. It's like that trusted advisor. I can imagine. I've been in cybersecurity for 24 years, right? So I do it for some of the largest companies in the world. But it would be nice to be a reservist, so to speak, and work for the city or for the state going, you know what? I live in this city. I live in this state. I'm willing to do some hours pro bono here to help drive some things forward. It'd be interesting to be able to have that. We have a lot of guys that would like to volunteer their time.
I tell you what I did was my 2 cabinet secretaries, that both lasted 2 years. I had one 2 years, then he got burned out. I was paying him. He was semi-retired in the area in the early 50s, and I approached him. I said, listen, I need you for public service. And I can pay you $130,000 a year to lead all IT for the state of North Carolina. Hmm. I'm talking about a state with a $22 billion budget, and I'm paying $131,000.
Wow.
Where in the private sector, what would that be paying?
Yeah, it'd be closer to 2. Depends on the user experience, yeah.
But you have to ask for people to sacrifice. And, hey, can you give me 2 years? It'll be a great experience. You're going to have fun. You're going to get to change the world. And you have to appeal for other reasons. Right. And so that's what I did. I got 2 outstanding people. In fact, sadly, I had to go to a funeral day, and I sat next in the pew to one of my old IT guys who I hadn't seen in 7 years. And he's working for the university system now, IT.
There you go. Yeah, my son's in the university system. So I have one who's a senior at UNC Charlotte, mechanical engineering, ROTC program. So we'll be in Air Force.
They got a good UNC engineering school's got really good school.
They do. You could tell it's good when you have a son who's straight A's honors and then gets put into a few difficult class and is really struggling. I love to see struggle. That man, it was pushing.
Absolutely.
Classes, and he's, I don't know, Dad, maybe I get in over my head. But that push that you're not getting straight A's right off the bat, I think that was a great.
There are some schools that give everyone an A just to inflate the grade and GPA to help them with the private sector, but most people recruiting know who inflates the grades and who doesn't. So I'm an old recruiter for Duke Power Company in my 30s. So we knew what schools inflated the grades and what schools were accurate.
I can tell you the tutoring bill has proven that they grade accurately at UNC Charlotte, because we've had to use in several
good to hear
aspects. I do see where they're building cybersecurity programs now. So UNC Charlotte's got one, North Carolina State's got one, where they're trying to bring up the skill sets of the local talent. I have two nephews, for instance, are going that cybersecurity route. And in many ways, it's difficult. It's difficult to get student loans when you don't have credit and you don't have a cosigner.
Yeah.
It's not just the program, but how do you live and how do you get living expenses while you go through the program to come out as a cybersecurity?
This is where, as governor, I attempted to do this, but boy, it's hard to do. We give all these scholarships away, but we treat them all equally. And when in fact, we ought to give scholarships based upon the market need. And one of the major market needs is cybersecurity. And by the way, other engineering fields too.
Right.
And the dilemma is due to politics is a lot of the scholarships being given aren't related to market demand. Are related to teaching right now. We pay all teachers the same in K through 12, even though the market demand for someone in IT or science or math is much higher and much more difficult to get. But if you want to, you have to pay them the same as the physical ed teacher.
Oh, wow.
And I try to change that. The teaching profession goes, that's not fair. So therefore, we have a major shortage in K through 12 schools of people with technical needs. And even our community colleges have a shortage because the private sector is stealing from our community colleges too.
Oh, I know. So there's a couple of them I deal with, I've consulted with here locally, some of the community colleges, and just keeping a good adjunct professor crew that have cybersecurity backgrounds and so forth. I know from all the experts I deal with every day is that we're so busy in work. The idea of being able to teach in the evenings is difficult. It's hard. And going to a community college, getting into that program, I think they would have a lot of benefits towards it.
I think personally, we ought to probably focus in our colleges and universities and our high schools much more on this issue. First of all, because there's a need. And second, this is where kids can make money and pay back their loans as opposed to other majors that they're taking where there's no jobs and they're going to be waiting tables and getting in debt. Sadly, our universities, many have not adjusted to the market demands of our country and to the private sector. And we need to treat some of these degrees where we have incredible needs in this area as we do a basketball need for a center or a guard, and you have to go recruit them and pay for it, and you'll get your return. And the private sector is doing this pretty well. The government sector just doesn't have the infrastructure in place to do this. And then once we get them, again, the turnover, some of the private sector has gotten, recruiters have gotten smart and go, hey, we'll let this young guy develop or woman develop in state of North Carolina job or a city of Charlotte job, and then we'll steal them.
Yeah.
So we got a lot of turnover at this point in time.
Well, I think some of the skills that concentrate too is that I think there's a misrepresentation of cybersecurity. So there is this thinking that you have to have some advanced mathematical understanding. You have to have calculus 3 training and all, when you really don't. There's several different dimensions to it. Some of them have to do with GRC, which governance, risk, and compliance. It's audit, it's assessments. It has a great perspective and it's needed in cybersecurity. It's not something like as an engineer myself, I would want to do. But there is other aspects of people who do want to do it. It's checklist based and so forth.
By the way, in addition to that, there are major legal issues regarding this. So usually if you have a issue where you have been infiltrated by another entity, and the most dangerous are the foreign entities, you also have to immediately get to your legal people. And you got to find legal people who understand this from a technical and legal people, which is very hard to do too.
Yeah.
And because you've got issues of chain of command. At what point in time, if you have been infiltrated, do you have to notify the customers whose data has been taken, or notify the public or the stockholders This was an issue I had with Homeland Security. At what point in time, because at some of the private sector people I dealt with who had been data taken, they had to go, say a low-level manager found out you have a data penetration, right? Someone's taken.
Right.
Then they try to figure it out themselves for a little bit, right? Maybe 24 hours. They go, oh my God, I'm going to try to figure this out myself. Now I better tell my supervisor. Well, the supervisor's going, now I got to tell my VP, but if I tell my VP, am I risking my job? Because the VP is going to go, what the hell did you just do? Why did this happen on your watch? So he's going to try to figure it out before they tell the VP. Then you tell the VP, and the VP's thinking the same thing to the president or to the governor. And then the governor or the president or CEO of the company is going, when do I tell my board of directors? And the governor is going, when do I tell the media? Because who's the media going to blame? They're going to blame whoever told them. And the governor's, of course, politically going to go, we found out, we did the right thing by finding out. Media won't care about that. They're not going to blame your predecessor.
Like blame management. Everybody's protecting themselves.
It's called CYA at all levels of an organization. And then, by the way, you might call the vendor or the consultant that you hired and was supposed to be contracting to cover this, to do this. And then the contractor is going to go, wasn't our fault. We communicated this. It's human dynamics. And while all this internal, it might be 24 hours, it might be 2 weeks, it might be 3 weeks, a month before it gets out, the people who are penetrating your system are taking advantage of it. So those are internal political things, whether you're in the private sector or in a political field like I've been, that you have to review. And of course, in a public traded company, you're worried about the stockholders. Is your stock going to dive if you all of a sudden announce that this has been penetrated and your IT or people are going, wait a minute, give me another 24 hours. I will fix it so we can say we were penetrated, but it's fixed. They give them another 24 hours. The CEO's going, is it fixed? No, give me another 24. And then they're on the line by going, their board's going to go, why didn't you let us know earlier? It's all logical.
Part of that is I compliment people into behavioral changes. For instance, when I'm dealing with chief information security officers or CEOs and they're wanting reports, and the incident just happened 30 minutes ago. But we don't have a report. We're in the middle of the fire. We're still trying to figure out which way's up. But they're always wanting a report. What's the status report? Because part of it is not that they don't trust you, is that they just want to contribute. If you need my assistance, you need me to get obstacles out of the way. And so what I would do when I got to the point where we could give that initial briefing, this is what's happening in the cyber incident, I think.
Well, they're also worried about, do I need to tell someone else? Now, you told him or her, okay, I've gotten this information. How long do I hold on to it? Or do I need to communicate it to my superior or to other peers in other departments?
Which is part of the incident response plan.
Right. And so they're going, at what point in time do I need to instigate there? And there's no perfect answer, especially as you're trying to fix it. I remember when Governor of South Carolina, Nikki Haley, when she just got into office, a lot of health information had been released. It wasn't her fault, but there was about a week-long story. Look what Nikki Haley's administration did. And of course, she's up here. Didn't probably even know it existed.
Yeah.
I even had instances as governor where I had a legislature, some vendor or a lobbyist got to a legislature and they wanted to buy data from the state of North Carolina. And they thought, that sounds good. It's a way to make money.
Like tax? Like tax data, or what kind of data were they looking for?
If I recall, it might have been healthcare data.
Interesting.
And it's a way the legislators who's thinking like this, going, oh, this is a way we can make money and help our deficit. And it's a great idea. And plus, this person's a strong supporter of mine. They employ a lot of people. Let's help them out. And thank God we caught it in the bill, in a huge budget bill, this little line in there about selling data. And it would have been a catastrophe.
How hard is it to catch those kind of things where you have
extremely hard
to come through and I don't know what that is. It's $100,000 that went out the door for something. I'm not sure what that is.
It's extremely hard, especially when there are changes being made up and marked up in the last minute. Now, hopefully it's not happening too well. And you got IT people who are watching out for that. And in my case, we had an IT person in my governmental affairs who found it and cut it off before the vote. And I'm not saying that guy was doing anything wrong. It was just his narrow thinking of privatization and things of this nature. It was a policymaker who was getting actively involved in the operation of state government. But you have these issues in so many of the systems that we buy. And in Homeland Security now, since even 2001, when we had the attack, think of all the systems that have been bought in every city and county and all the op centers that have been every city. New York being the first, built their op center on the 8th floor of the World Trade Center. That was the Emergency Operations Center that I went to go see a month before, early July of 2001. Giuliani took me to a tour of this high-tech op center with a lot of data, a lot of cameras, a lot of video that we didn't used to have. That's probably be used by terrorists. And I remember going, hey, we need this in Charlotte. And we built one in Charlotte. Now, 2 months later, that ended up not being a very good spot for the brand new public safety coordination center to be built. I think it was the 8th floor, one of the World Trade buildings.
Interesting. That would be interesting to be a part of that. I had something similar when I was in the Marine Corps. I was stationed. I went to the South Korea, so I was on an operation there on the DMZ. And I got Army colonel brings us into this bunker, and we get to see the defense of the Korean Peninsula. And here's the live radar of North Korea versus South. And I'm telling you, it's not propaganda. There is nothing happening in North. There is no radar signal.
It's dark.
There's no hits. South Korea is lit up like a Christmas tree, and North is dead. You don't even see a single plane. It's not propaganda. That really exists. And I thought it was interesting just seeing how that set up, how that kind of war bridge was, and so forth. And one of the things I think of government all the time is that where is that kind of war bridge? Did you have that as governor, where you have the different utilities that are calling in if there is a cybersecurity incident? There's some kind of centralized reporting mechanism. And I think to your point is maybe the key is having the incident response plan where you're notifying people in the right order at the right time. Because like you're saying, it just seems to get out of hand. If you notify too quickly, too fast, it just politically gets taken over, and it's no longer a technical issue. It's more of a political one after that. Is that what you're saying? And
then there's an issue. Do you notify the White House first, or do you notify a governor, or do you notify a mayor, depending upon where it goes? Do you notify? They're all levels of government, and we're a confederation in a way. And then the same thing occurs where the White House or the executive branch might find out there's a national breach. And who do they call first? Do they call their senator? Do they call their congressman? Do they call the governor? Do they call the mayor? Say the breach happened in Charlotte. So who's the Biden White House call? The mayor first? The governor, or the two senators? Or they try to do it all at once? And what's the scope of the people we notify if you want to keep it secret? Or do you just notify the chiefs of police and keep it within the public safety realm? Or the head of the SBI or FBI? So there are issues of, is it confidential or is it not confidential? And if it's confidential, they'll probably go to law enforcement first, not even to the governors. Because the word will get out very quickly. So as I heard, I got confidential reports as both the mayor and the governor on potential terrorist activities. And the question is, what do you do with that information? Now, I also might say that there's a lot of intel out there on terrorist activity. And I remember me and other governors would go get an update from the FBI. We'd all go in a room and they'd close all the shutters and take our phones, and we'd go, this is going to be pretty cool. We're going to hear some neat stuff. And a lot of it's cybersecurity stuff about what they're hearing. So they give you a long introduction about how this must be kept confidential. This is extremely important. They give like a 20-minute intro, and we're all just going, we're about to learn something. And then what you learn is what you just heard on CNN. It's already out.
It's already out.
And so it's not like the old TV show 24.
Right.
But information is power, and that's why people are trying to steal it.
Yeah, I have these 4 guys that work for me, and they come from the intelligence agency. So I have 3, 4, 5 people, NSA. The company I work for is called Deep Seas, and we have 160 employees. 23% of us are veterans. So there is a mission focus when we do cybersecurity. We don't go to sleep while there's still an incident that's happening. And I think there's a lot of focus on trying to drive change within organizations, how to do things what's best for our customers, how to focus on it. What they were telling me from their NSA background experience is that we took a real hit when the whole Snowden breach occurred. We didn't have the technological advantage when it came to our adversaries, especially when it had China and Russia. And because of that, that knocked us back. So you could always debate what was that the right way to do, how when he disclosed that, what he did. But I could tell you that the impact was tremendous, I know, to the NSA, their ability for implants, how they were collecting information, and so forth. Now, it seems to be a much more dangerous world, is what we're hearing, is more of a field. And most of the incidents I'm dealing with are Chinese, Russian-based. They're a lot of them are APT actors. They're advanced threat actors. So they have resources. They have people. This isn't just a kid that goes to the dark web. They have infrastructure. They have what's called TTPs, or tactics, techniques, and procedures. They've repeated it. And there's orchestration. So, for instance, I would steal your credentials. I would send out a phishing email to steal your credential. And I'm not going to do anything with it. I'm going to sell it to an IAB, or initial access broker. So I send it to the eBay of credentials, and I just sell it off to somebody else. I don't even attempt to do it. So there's an entire economy behind it that's on the dark web. But I could tell you lately, we see a lot of takedowns by the FBI. The FBI has really gone across and taken some serious actors down. You could see a few of them, like Conti ransomware group was out of the Baltic nations. So they had half Russian, half Ukrainian people that were in this criminal organization. And then when the war had hit, there was almost like a civil war occurred within that group. They were making something like $30 million a month on their ransomware. And because what happens is now I don't have to steal your data and then try to go sell it. I just lock and ransom your PC, and then I force you to pay me in order to have it unlocked.
And by the way, the question is, if ransom is being sought, the other issue, the leaders of whether it's a governor or mayor or a CEO, is, do I tell anyone about this? Think about that decision right there. Do I keep this a secret and just go, the cost of doing business, we'll put it in the budget somewhere, or do I let it publicly known, which could be again, you're talking about people's jobs. Someone's going to be looking to blame somebody. And those are tough decisions to make. So some of those things you're dealing with, one of the biggest issues is communications. Who do we tell? 9/11, you go back to 9/11, some of the breakdowns were all in communications. We had some of the information. Sure. Now, this wasn't cyberware at the time, but it's the matter of who you share it with. And there's pros and cons to sharing information, because you don't know if it's complete information. I'll tell you the other thing I'm worried about, and I'd love your feedback, is now that everyone's going home and doing work at home with laptops.
Yeah.
There's no main computer. Everyone's going to the cloud. In both government and in the private sector, I have to assume the controls are even more vulnerable in this business. Because right now, a lot of people in both government and the private sector are doing their work at home.
Yeah.
And that means your laptop is vulnerable. And I imagine the bad guys know this very well.
They did. Though when the pandemic first hit, there was mad chaos on that side. So what will happen is the attack surface space has opened up for government employees, for everyone who's working at home. That bring your own device type methodology that says bring your laptop, you can connect to the cloud services and I don't have to worry about updating it, patching it, and paying for the license is hugely backfired when the pandemic shut everybody down. Nobody had remote access capabilities at that scale for their entire team. And yes, we had security threats where we had people doing administrative work from their home PC that never had antivirus or was connected to another wireless network. So yes, that whole move to remote management caused massive problems, and people had to implement different proxy-based systems. Like, for instance, you can head home, go to Google and look up anything you want, anything that's may deemed inappropriate. Let's say hacking tools. You want to go look at the latest hacking tool. You can do that at home, download it, try it, and so forth. We don't want that on corporate machines. We don't want you just to be able to go download, kind of blur the line between a personal PC and a corporate device when you're using that bring your own. Now, let me preference that. When you're doing bring your own mobile device for things, it's a little bit different because we've had technology that allows us to keep data in apps, and I don't have to wipe your entire phone if you leave the company. I just wipe that one app. And so we have the best of both worlds. You don't get my data, and I don't have to wipe your personal phone. But doing with desktops is just much different. And
plus, with the old days, you used to fire somebody and you just took their desktop away and they left the office. Now you got to go track down their stuff at home. And that you think you can get it. And I can't imagine the difficulty now. This laptop and the cloud have changed the world since I've been in office. And I mean, everything was hard drive and and you think about this I used to work for Duke Power Company. Yeah. And I just noticed I was in downtown Charlotte the other day and I saw their old hard drive building, one of those old solid, looks like a German bunker in Normandy, being torn down.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's gone.
Oh, wow.
So I don't know where they keep they either contract out their data or the world has changed. But you're talking about the power grid, the telephone grid, grids which control our water systems, grids control our military systems, grids that control police information, criminal justice information, medical information, many more lists. We're extremely vulnerable. And it's beyond me. It's beyond my pay grade on how we're going to do it. And I'll just say from a government standpoint, the problem is are you getting the level of people that you need? Do you have the training to keep people up to date? Do you have the security in place? Do you have the political will to do it? Do you have legislators which budget money toward that, especially if you're in tough financial times? We'll hold off on that for another year. We're having other issues that we've got to deal with that are much more important to our constituency.
And I'll tell you what I notice that helps us so much in the world is procurement, for instance, is ensuring when you do invoke third parties, there is a risk management aspect to this. They do meet certain cybersecurity controls. So I think there's a lot to do with procurement. But one of the biggest problems I have is defending networks that are old and they had mergers or acquisitions, or they never kept up with the life cycle of it. You have old Windows 7 machines that have never been patched, and somehow we're supposed to magically protect these things. But the computing life cycle that they're supposed to follow and get decommissioned after 5 years, the application rolls away, and nobody lives with it. They essentially buy computers and applications and think they're self-healing and they just keep up with themselves and nobody has to do anything. But that technical debt is what gets popped all the time in most of our intrusions. It's not the newer desktops that rolled out with the new Harding guidelines. It's not any of that. It's all the older stuff. And then it's the credentials for the domain admins, the people that have the keys to the kingdom. When they're surfing internet using those kings of the kingdom and they get loose, an attacker gets them, they impersonate them and take over the entire network. So we see a lot of things is just basic. Get rid of older equipment, have a life cycle to do that. And then, like you're saying, having the trained people and the will to put that in a consolidated focus. If you're distributed and you have one department of the government is doing one thing, have their own IT, one have the other, it's nearly impossible to coordinate a cyber approach to that.
And now let me tell you, be frank about politics, procurement. You got to make sure you keep the politics out of it. You keep the rules consistent and fair. But the people who put in bids also contribute to politicians. and the political parties and the super PACs now. I'm just reading the thing about FTX right now, and they were giving money out like candy a month before they went under, trying to get political protection. If FTX is,
Obvious dollars, that's what they were spending right at the end?
Oh, they were giving money to campaigns and to super PACs. I'm talking in the tens of millions of dollars. They gave to Schumer, they gave to McConnell, they gave to conservative super PACs, they gave to liberal super PACs, and I guarantee they gave to every person on banking and finance committees in both the Senate and the House.
Wow.
And you'd like to say that didn't have any influence, but you had congressmen and from both Republicans and Democrats write letters trying to stop FTX from being looked into. Of course, you had celebrities involved, but you just translate that into, that's a money thing, which was controlled by what type of cybersecurity do they have controlling people's money. But there was a lot of money going to Washington, D.C. and to the political system, which probably delayed the inevitable of this guy getting caught. But you're seeing some of this come out of the trial. So procurement and oversight, you've got to make sure is protected from the political system. But you also have to protect it from the bureaucracy that sometimes get lazy and then look for new things because they're not rewarded in the government bureaucracy for change.
I noticed that. Yeah, it's not noticed for because there's no revenue incentive, right? Or there's
none. They want to get through their pension, man. They want to get their 20 or 30 years in, and it's human nature. I'm not criticizing them as into. So change is just making my last 5 years more difficult.
Interesting.
I'm talking about
part of a legacy. Like I'm going to leave a legacy by changing X, Y, and Z why I'm here. So that's
what's the incentive? You don't get bonuses. The reward in government work is pensions, and there are no pensions in the private sector. There are still pensions in the public sector. So you get pensions for surviving in time. So how's that interact with your field, which changes every single day?
It doesn't. Yeah. None of us work for pensions. None of us think about pensions.
Think of the military. Military's pension too. You got to get your 20 years in at least, then you get your pension. And in police, it's 25 years, although in some cities that are going broke with pension programs, so they're all underfunded. We got to make sure in your business we're motivating people to watch out for these things. And in government, there's not as much incentive to do that. The pay structure is not set that way.
So it's interesting so for the government of 2024 and beyond, where do you think government needs to move to? I know cloud services, you have different technology platforms, but is there just a different way that government should look at how do you do technology and cybersecurity? It's almost...
First, you're going to have to adjust the pay scale. You're going to have to start paying private sector. The dilemma is the other government workers will tell the legislature, that's not fair. If you raise their pay, I need my pay raised. Then you have taxes that will bankrupt. So you've got to get in a more market-based bonus related area, especially these technology fields. And then you've got to come up with a system where you can get trusted vendors, but not vendors that have a clear monopoly and become so powerful that you can never change them. Because once they're hired, they start giving political donations too. Again, legal political donations, but they become very powerful to keep their contracts. And I hate to say it, but people with government contracts tend to give political donations at the city, state, and federal level, especially to the committees in charge. I'm not saying that's their incentive. I'm just saying there is probably a little motivation there. And I'm talking about legal donations. Any illegal stuff you have to watch out for too. Direct cash payments. Hell, we just had a senator. He was indicted for taking payments from Egypt. Gold Menendez. So there is so much money in these contracts. And whenever there's a lot of money into something, there's going to be someone stupid enough to tempt the decision makers, and there'll be some of those decision makers tempted enough to take it. And that in the private sector too, corruption. And the Chinese government and the Russian governments, you're all of a sudden seeing a lot of arrests being made of sailors or on ships that might get arrested, of that sailor showing what that system is on a ship or something. And what's even more ironic, it's not that much money, but it's a lot of money to that sailor. But for the people paying their money, they're probably shocked at how little it takes to find out that information.
Right.
And China is good at it, so is Russia. And
it's a no-go for us executives too. So especially people like myself who used to have security clearances. We don't go to China anymore. And mostly when I was with another bank for a while, we would send executives to China and we'd give them a burner laptop and then we'd trash it and literally destroy the laptop. Not even
when we arrest that soldier recently, it was 23 years old. And he had access to all this information at 23.
Oh, you mean the National Guards?
Yeah. 22, 23. And our adversaries can see those weaknesses. They're very smart. Yeah, these are all issues that we all have to be worried about. And we have to have politicians who are courageous enough to ask these questions, both in private and in public, and put people on notice that we're watching this. We've got the right people in oversight. The dilemma is that this is not on a survey. As a political survey, you're not rewarded for talking about this. You're rewarded for giving out benefits or cutting taxes or whatever the four main issues of the day are.
You're not incentivized really to solve problems. And this is a big...
No. You're incentivized to solve the problems that the people are interested in, but most people don't even know about this issue. It's not on the top of their dinner plate conversation about cybersecurity. But it will be once a lot of their data is stolen, and you're starting to see more information going about data being stolen.
And does it make sense you would think that the governor today would institute some project or pass some legislation to get funding and go, I'm going to spend X amount of dollars. We're going to remediate this. We're going to do a future state.
I did that. And again, I had to get legislation to make the position of cabinet secretary. So I had to actually go seek legislation. I didn't have the authority to do that on my own, according to the state constitution. So I had to form a secretary of IT, information technology. And then I had to get that person approved by the Senate. So it's a very bureaucratic process when you're dealing in days trying to solve problems. Now, you work through that and you informally go and make them a secretary before you get approval. But my successor, I don't know what's happened with that since. He might have you could get political pressure by DOT secretary. I want my IT stuff back.
Yeah. And tell me this, I look at like C-SPAN and I see these senators and these congressmen and they're debating these bills. And I'm like, how many of them actually know anything about cybersecurity and technology? Are they all lawyers up there? Who is actually doing this? It doesn't seem to be my cybersecurity or IT pros that are opining these things, right?
No, listen, the congressmen and the governors, me too, you only have a certain amount of wit to understand. And you could be on the banking committee. It could take you 5 years to understand basic banking compared to the people who are, so you rely on your staffs, usually the committee staff. So you're relying on 26 and 27-year-olds and a few veterans. And then the lobbyists come in who are protecting their stuff, and they'll set up meetings with every member of the committee and go, this is what you need to do. And they might be giving conflicting information, and the lobbyists will bring a technical expert with them and try to teach the political decision maker the basic 102. My weakness when I became governor, I did not have health and human services background. As a mayor, I was an infrastructure guy. So I hired a really well-qualified health and human services secretary. And she literally, in my first 5 meetings, hell, even in my last 5 meetings, almost talked to me like a first grader trying to explain it, because I just had no bandwidth in that area. And I had to rely on her trust to tell me what I needed to know.
And you need those right staffers around you. You're in that position to make those decisions, but having qualified staff to advise you, I think that's critical.
It's extremely important. You got to have a trusted relationship, and sometimes you're disappointed. Sometimes people will tell you half the information you need to know because they're saving, they're protecting their rear end. And again, most people, 90%, 95% of the people I dealt with were great people. Yeah. The 5% can give you a heck of a problem, and you're going to see that at the federal, state, and local level. And a lot of it is they're just not qualified. I inherited I remember my Secretary of Health and Human Services coming in, who, by the way, had about a $20 billion budget, including federal money. She came in and said, Governor, we're $500 million over budget. I said, why am I finding this out now? She said, because the person reviewing the data only recorded the data, never interpreted the data. They were being paid just to write it down, to record it. We didn't have anyone interpreting the data and say, hey, there's a trend going on here that started 5 months ago. You're in deep problem.
Nobody was reading the report, so to speak.
So you apply that to data security. You might have a person who's been hired to do this, and if it's outside their realm, I'll let someone else worry about that. That's again, I'm not throwing stones. It's just human dynamics.
Yeah. And do you think every state's different? It's just
yes, that's the other problem. Every state's different. And yet the federal government has to share with states certain information and vice versa, because they share systems regarding federal programs being transferred to the states for implementation. So the security of those programs and monies and the controls could be different. We had issues, and I have 100 counties in the state of North Carolina, and we do audits of the 100 counties, and there'd be maybe 5 counties that had lost total control of the funds. Think how long it took to do the audit.
Yeah, I can imagine.
And they were, again, nothing illegal. They just didn't have the management aptitude. You're talking about rural counties with 10,000 people in it.
So how do you get them to understand high-tech issues, cybersecurity issues, and how to remediate them?
We'd probably start doing it for them. You ain't got time.
Built in as part of the service, yeah.
You haven't got time. By the way, it's not just the rural counties. Some of the largest counties were having the largest problems because the bureaucracy was so deep, and even some of the skill sets were so poor, but they just hung around long enough to get promoted. The Peter principle. Again, not bad people. It's just that you're just trying to move on to the next fire.
Yeah, and I could see opportunity where if the governor had an advisory board and had people like myself and others that would advise some of these things, and doing it from a volunteer perspective.
I'd have that. I had a lot of advisory boards, but the more boards you have, the more time consumption, and you only have so much time in the day in such a large organization. I had 15, 20 departments reporting to me and my chief of staff. And how many advisory boards? And some of those departments were huge departments where I could have advisory boards by the dozens within one department. But they were important, and they'd report to my secretary. So the advisory boards do a real good job in asking the right questions. Where they do a bad job is when some of the people will go try to take over from operations standpoint, as opposed to advisory board stand up. And then it creates more work. The advisory board, I want to see a report on this. And who's got time for a report?
Right. You've had a fascinating life, and it's always great talking to you. Unfortunately, we ran out of time, but
no problem.
It is great to get your perspective on government and what works, what doesn't.
The good, the bad, the ugly. It's human.
Yeah, and you always look at it from the outside. You have no idea. You got a personal experience as a mayor and as a governor, and the rest of us look at it and go, I would prefer that type of position rather than like congressman, because it seems like you're working and fixing things. It's like a
congressman is a waste. That was my dream, was to be a congressman. But once I became mayor, I said I could, because I enjoy management. I enjoy operations. I'm not a day-to-day operations guy, but I know what questions ask for operations, but I could never do it myself. And I admit that.
You can provide good governance on it.
Yeah, that was one of my strengths. I had many weaknesses, and IT was one of my strengths. My knowledge and aptitude of IT was that of a first grader, but that sometimes helped because I wasn't afraid to ask the questions. Even I didn't allow IT or any other department to use acronyms in my staff meetings. No acronyms were allowed.
There you go. That's a good rule to have in some cases. Alphabet soup for sure.
Yeah.
And I so appreciate you coming on the show, Governor, giving your perspective. What time is your radio program, just for everybody to
I'm only doing Wednesdays now. I used to have the number one morning show in Charlotte from 8 to 10, and now I'm only doing Wednesdays from 9 to 10. But I'm getting involved with some other things right now. And No Labels is something I'm very interested in. It's a group, a bipartisan group, as we're divided as a nation. No Labels is, again, I'm with Joe Lieberman, a Democrat. I'm a Republican, and Ben Chavis and Larry Hogan, two Republicans, two Democrats who are going, we can do better. And if we have a divided nation, we got to start talking to each other. Ben thought I was some right-wing extremist, and I thought he was some left-wing protester, radical, violent guy. And we found out we're neither one. And we agree on 90% of the issues. And we've become very close friends, along with Joe Lieberman, former vice senator and vice president. We've become very close friends, and we're trying to lead by example.
And that is
and
great.
We might have a presidential candidate come next March, April, if the current status quo remains. But we'll see. We'll see.
Let me know. It's great to hear bipartisanship and hear that it actually occurs, because when you look at the news and the media, it doesn't appear that's occurring.
No, what's the most important first is civility first, and agree to disagree and don't turn to violence. And both Ben Chavis and I are very concerned. I've had to deal with violence, calling the National Guard, and he was arrested improperly for violence that he wasn't active in, and he went through 8 years of prison. And so we've both been canceled in some ways too. We better start talking to each other as human beings, like we've done in this podcast, and be honest and upfront. We got the best country in the world. Don't take it for granted.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I can tell you, I moved to Charlotte about 12 years ago, and the city is phenomenal. The school systems, the taxes. When I first moved to Charlotte 12 years ago, I rented a place right around Huntersville area. But it was $1,500 for a 5-bedroom, 3,600 square foot.
Oh, the good old days.
Good old days. It was great. Low taxes, school systems. We moved now in South Charlotte and just really continued. And
I love our city. And I spent 6 years as city councilman and 14 years as mayor. So I've devoted 20 years of my life in it. And so I still care about what happens to it. Although I've been out of office as mayor since 2009. I left office. So I might have just missed you.
And I appreciate people who find that this is my skill set, is bureaucracy of government, running government, the administration of government, and people who focus on that and want to be experts of that. I appreciate that. I think that's a noble thing.
There's some good people, and we had some good IT people in the city. But it's getting tough. The market demand is, we got to get our colleges and universities to adapt real quick, in our 2-year schools and our high schools. Or China's doing it, Russia's doing it.
You're going to catch up fast.
Better catch up. God bless.
God bless. Thanks, Pat. And I'll talk to you soon, Governor. And you have a good evening.
That's fine. Thank you very much.
Thank you for joining Cybersecurity America. Please don't forget to hit that subscribe and comment and turn on those notifications. You have a good evening. Thank you very much.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Cybersecurity America on the Voice America Business Channel. We hope you've learned some valuable information to help you be a better executive leader and navigate today's complex world of cybersecurity. Until next week, stay secure.